In this final video, I'm going to show you a little bit on how you can present your Hypolian model. After creating this, it's always interesting if you can show it with a nice render. So what I'm doing here is I change my render engine to Mental Ray, and I'm changing the resolutions of my render. Then I go into the renderer settings and just switch box to Lanczos. That's because it's a high quality anti-aliaser compared to box, which I think is not all that good. Then I go to materials, I click this standard button, and I change to an Argent Design material, which I think is more interesting. Change the diffuse color, and once that's done, I open up this preview. I change the glossiness slightly so I get a nicer gloss on the surface. I also want to reduce the reflectivity because I think it's a little bit too strong. And then I open up the special effects, turn on ambient occlusion. Number of samples is okay, but I think the max distance is a little bit too big, so I changed this to 7. So with that done, I want this material applied to everything, but I want to use the override so I don't have to assign the material to every single part. That way I would lose all the colors I've put on this. So just to test this material, I'm going to render it. So the render looks like this, which is not all that good yet. The black background is awful and we have some pretty bad anti-aliasing. So first thing I'm going to do is change out the background with something a little bit more interesting. I want to create this slight gradient that goes from gray to a little bit darker gray. So I'm opening up a gradient ramp bitmap here, and I'm changing the colors to light gray on one end and dark gray on the other end. Then I go into environment. I have to make sure the mapping is set to environ and mapped to screen, so that it looks right on the screen. Also rotate it 90 degrees or the gradient would go from left to right instead of top to bottom. So I've added in that gradient. And let's see then. Then I'm going to go in and change the anti-aliasing settings and up the maximum to 16 because lots of those small details weren't coming through. So that looks quite a bit better already. But we have a problem here. The wires aren't showing for a lot of the things I've modeled. Plus, I'm missing shadows and everything, obviously. But first things first, some of my models aren't rendering, and that's because these splines have a setting show in viewport and show in renderer, and I've only turned on the enable in viewport and not the enable in renderer. That means they're not visible once I render. So I turn this on. Do the same thing here. And since a lot of parts are instance, I only have to do it for one of two. With that done, I'm going to create my lights. I go to photometric lights and create an MR sky portal light. Normally this is a light you would use to boost the influence from your skylight, but I prefer these because you can get some really nice soft reflections with them. And the best thing about them is they render really fast for their quality. You can use different lights, but those are a lot slower. I'm just positioning them right, trying to get them in the right angle, rotation, everything. I want this bulldozer lit with 2 lights, one from the right of the camera, my view, and one coming a bit from left above my camera. So I'm rotating this one, get it in the correct position, move it a little bit closer. Also, the camera position I'm using to render is just a really temporary preview position. I'm going to change that later on. So I'm just trying to get a nice angle here. And I think this one needs to go a little bit further back. And you can see it's sitting in front of the camera also, which is not exactly a problem, but I don't want the light to look like it's coming from the camera. So with that done, I want to choose the light color for the lights. There are 2 special materials here, which you will have to enable in the folder at the top. You can see Max, Mental Ray, Shader Standard include. To open base_max with a notepad program, such as I'm doing here. And pause the video if it's going too fast, okay? And then I have to look for a CIE_D. And these are parameters in this file that enable if this is visible in the user interface. You can see I've commented out the hidden by adding the that sign in front of it. If you do that, save it, and watch out, it might be read-only. Reopen Max, you will get these in your UI. So I choose one of these materials, and they only have 2 parameters, temperature and intensity. I'm going to type in 80 for intensity, because I know this is a setting that will work. Call this one cold. Why cold? I'm going to set the temperature pretty high, and that means if you set a high temperature in terms of color temperature, you will get bluish colors. If you set a low temperature, such as here, 5000, you will get warm colors. I know this is contradictory, but if you want to find out more about this, just Google for color temperature and read it on Wikipedia or something. Then I set the color source to custom and drop my CID material in that slot. I'm doing the same for the other light. And once that is done, I go up here and I'm going to change the filter color just to make it a little bit more clear for me what the exact color of this light is. Also, it slightly influences the color of the lights themselves. So I'm having the color temperature and the filter color both influence my lights here. I hit render, and look at that. These lights are making a huge difference. This render is already starting to look pretty good. There are a few problems. The colors are a bit overbright. The speculars are too strong. I need to reduce these color settings slightly. Go more towards white. My CID setting, I'm also going to reduce these to 8000 and up that to 5500. Intensity should be slightly lower. I'm going to go into my background here and drop that here. And this one I'm going to change slightly. This one will serve for a reflection environment for my material. I want my bulldozer to slightly reflect an environment. So I'm creating some new pointers in that ramp there, changing the colors around. Both at the end are black, and the left one in the center is black, while the right one is white. Notice that I've set the environment mapping to spherical. Then I up the output amount, which as you can see makes this a lot brighter. And once I've done that, I'm going to go to my gray material, go to special purpose maps, and drop this one in the environment slot. That means it will reflect that as an environment. You can't see it here yet. And for that reason, I'm just going to render this and see what it looks like. And it's looking really, really bright now. So I'm suspecting that this reflection from the environment is too strong. So I'm going back into my gradient ramp here and turning this down to 1 and maybe even 0.5. I think that will work better. As you can see, this is not an exact process. I'm just going back and forth and tweaking things. You should do so too. My settings aren't settings that will work in every situation. It could be different for you. So try to think and change things. I'm also reducing the light slightly, which will also take brightness down. And trying to get a nice camera angle. There we go. I just hit Control C and I'm zooming in slightly. There we go, and positioning the camera correctly. And what I did was create a camera from view with Control C. I'm just showing you again. It's an easy way to save your viewpoint of that moment. So I'm rendering again. And this is looking better. It's not over bright anymore. But I think that the speculars are too strong and too bright. So I need to work on that. I think they're overpowering everything a bit too much. I'm changing the reflectivity, tweaking the curve shape slightly, then going back up to glossiness and increasing that so that we don't have such wide speculars. Reflectivity needs to go down also. And I'm going to render frame window. And as you can see, the colors for the lights might need some slight adjustments as well. Using this one even further. Make this one about 6000. I'm bringing them closer together because I think the difference is slightly too big. This value should work. Don't take my values as written laws. You really should look for your own values. So that's slightly better, not too colored anymore. And the reason I did that color change is because I think the blue and yellow lights are becoming a bit of a cliche look, and I want it to be slightly different. I want to make my render special in another way. So again, I tweak the reflectivity, and then I go into the materials, copy my current one, and create a red version of it. And you can guess why this is. I like these red colors on my bulldozer, and I want to have that same thing in my render. Just changing the diffuse color, changing the specular color, and then, of course, I need to stop the material override. So I turn that off. Then I select everything. And I'm going to lose my colors, of course, yeah, but that doesn't matter so much now. I will assign my gray material. And then I just need to go about and select all my red parts and assign the red material. So again, in case you forgot, these are the parts that will have human interaction. I need to make sure this has a unique name, so I'm calling it red. Makes sense, right? Selecting all the parts that will have human interaction, so the handles, etc. You can see I did all of them here. Then I copy this material again and making it dark. The reason for that is I don't want my tracks and some other dark parts to have the same color as the body of the bulldozer. So just turning the diffuse color down a few tones and assigning that to the windows. There we go, assign to windows, and that last one. And that should be about okay. I might leave the tracks like that. I think the windows are most important so that they stand out. Tracks actually don't look bad in the same color. So we have my materials assigned. The lighting setup is pretty good. So I'm going to add my render elements. And the reason for this is you could use this render as the final result, but I want to take it a step further and go into Photoshop because I believe I can make a big difference. So I'm adding a lot of render passes, reflections, specular, diffuse direct illumination, diffuse indirect illumination. I'm also adding ambient occlusion, very important one, the ambient occlusion. And I'm also adding a Z depth. I could optionally use this to create some depth of field. If you want to use Z depth, then you got to make sure that you set up the parameters correctly. It's the only element that requires you to tweak the parameters. And you have to measure the distance from the camera to the farthest visible point in your render. So I'm going in the top view, drawing a line from my camera to, well, this is the closest point. I need to go to the farthest point. So that will be over there. Click. Once that's done, I'm going to the measure tool, which is in the tools utilities tab, and it has a length of 385. So I should pick a Z max of 400. So my Z depth will be scaled between 100 and 400 in distance. With those things done, I'm going to return to my view here and hit the render button. The render is going, and there we go. We have all these separate windows open. You have to save all of them separately. Unfortunately, there's no really easy way to get these saved. Also, I just prefer for a single render to do it like this. Give them the correct names. Make sure that 32-bit is on and that you are turning off pre-multiplied alpha. That's very important. Turn off pre-multiplied alpha. We'll get problems otherwise. So maybe go back in the video and check the settings out again. So I'm saving all of these separate, and you can see the colors are here in the diffuse. Direct illumination is pretty much like my base pass. And I'm going to save indirect illumination, which you can see is a lot darker. I'm just naming it after the render process. Clear names that make it easier for me to identify them. Now, once again, the format is really important when you save these files. Don't mess that up. Don't pick JPEG or anything. You cannot use JPEG for render passes. It's impossible to use. So save the Z depth. There we are. You could also use this render, but I'm going to save it as a full.tga just in case I want to compare with my edit. Then I go into Photoshop, and the base pass that I'm going to open is the direct out diffuse pass. I open that up. I'm also going to open my diffuse indirect pass. So I copy this, hit Control-C here, and then I close it. I paste this pass here and set the blend mode to linear dodge add. And as you can see, it slightly adds a bit more lighting to areas that aren't that easy to reach for other lights. Then I use the alpha channel to delete the borders of my base pass because I want this to float independently of the background. Now I'm getting rid of the gradient background because, well, it doesn't really matter. I could add it, but I don't think it's adding too much. Then I pick up the raw ambient occlusion pass. I open this up. I select the alpha with Control-click on the channel. I invert my selection and I'm going to add white all around it. The reason for that is I don't want the black around my AO to darken the background. Then I duplicate this layer to my file here. And you can use the AO in a simple way. Just turn it to multiply. And as you can see, that nicely adds a lot of detail. This is a very important pass. But I've decided that I'm going to do something very special here. I'm going to pick this ambient occlusion pass, add it as an alpha, invert it, and then control click this to use it as a mask for adjustments. So with this selection, I create a new level adjustment layer, call it AO Burn, ambient occlusion burn. I'm going to adjust these settings to change the colors in the ambient occluded areas. I want the ambient occluded areas to have this slightly rust brownish darkened burned look. So you can see that I'm adjusting the channel sliders separately here. Going into blue. Blue is making a big difference. And just changing these sliders around a little bit. I don't have a rule for this. I'm just looking for a color that I like. And this orange tone is looking okay. So if you turn it on and off, it almost looks like it's textured. That's pretty cool, right? I go back to the AO layer, turn it to multiply. And that slightly darkens the effect, which I think is nice. So with that done, I need to go and use my other passes here. Picking up out reflection and out specular. So just copy everything here. There we go. Use the select everything, paste it in here. There we are. And use that layer as a mask and then turn it to linear dodge add. As you can see, it's adding a slight reflection to some edges. It's very faint, but I think it's worth adding. Render pass is free anyway, so why not use it? And I do the same thing with the specular. Then filter the edges outside and turn it to linear dodge add. Now, there's a problem here. The ambient occluded areas, they also have specular. So I'm selecting the ambient occlusion, go into my mask, and then filling with black what is also ambient occluded, so that I don't have specular reflections in ambient occluded areas. So that's pretty much it, how I combine my render passes. I could use Z-depth also. It's not hard. You have to use filter lens blur. I decided not to do it. And you can see the difference here, right? Big difference from a very flat render to something that looks pretty good. And that ambient occlusion burn effect, not possible in Max. Here's another level adjustment layer for the final color adjustments. And I'm just moving around the sliders a little bit to get some nice effect in here. I think this is one of the most important things, in my opinion, in image processing and post-producing, is that you realize that you should edit and adjust channels independently from each other. You can get some very interesting color results. As you can see, you know, this vintage dark feel in there, aiming for something special. So I want slightly warmer tones. Look at that. That's it. That's it for the video. Hope you learned something from this, and you can present your renders nicely with this technique.